participants to make sure they get the information they watch the video of. Yes, because we don't want them to miss out on all this awesome knowledge that y'all are going to be sharing with us tonight. So we always start with our theory of action. So we do that so that we can remind ourselves why we're here, ground ourselves in our purpose for coming together over the next 6 months. So we have it here, we have it on a board back here, you all have it in your journals. But can we have, let's see, Jasmine, will you read it out loud to us?
Theory of action. When we better train our board members before their first day in office and actively recruit diverse community members to serve on the board, we will have better results for children in Cincinnati Public Schools. We believe that the most effective school board members are grounded in their values and mission and know the most important issues affecting students in their community. They understand their role, support their administration, build coalitions, get effective and meaningful policies passed, and make decisions that change student outcomes.
Right, so that is what we are all doing together. The other thing we always do is read the objectives for tonight. So taking it kind of from the big picture to what we want to accomplish today. So we have a lot to accomplish today. David, you want to read those for us?
Sure. Classmates will understand the difference between the board's role, which is governance, and the district administration's role, which is management. Believe that when board members and administrators understand their roles and adhere to the distinction between governance and management, they can maintain a healthy relationship, get their work done, and improve student achievement. Know what to do when a board member breaches the protocol or bylaws. Understand what community engagement looks like as a board member. Understand the board's structure, including how it gets work done and how board members and administration work together and communicate. A lot, isn't it?
Right, a lot to do.
Be introduced to the central office organization chart so that they begin to understand the district's structure.
All right, that's a heavy lift for tonight. And then on our first night we were together, I talked about how from this session on, we are going to, after we've done our theory of action and our objectives for the night, we're going to actually focus in, kind of getting it from the macro to the micro on your own personal vision for impact statements. So at the beginning of every session and at the end of every session, y'all will review that for yourself to remind yourself why you're here personally, and then also to see how and if that changes with what you're learning. So why doesn't everyone open up to page 19, which is the chapter for tonight? And if you've already rewritten your vision for impact statement, give it a read. If you haven't yet, go ahead and rewrite it right there so you remind yourself of your purpose for being here. So we'll give everyone a minute to do that.
I have those for my sentences, but I can't.
So there's a spot right there on 19 for you to rewrite it or reread it. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to some introductions so everybody knows everybody who's in the room tonight. So, let's see if I can get this over. Hey, Louise, would you just shift your computer just a little because it's trying to get
Oh, I'm
to...
sorry.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so our experts tonight. What's up, big Arlo? That's good. They're quite attractive too. We know tonight our goal is to really learn about what the board does, what the administration does, and then how they work together to get the work of the district done. And so we have two guests with us tonight who did the work of the district and work on the board for many, many, many years. So most of you know Mary Roden because she was one of your interviewers.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah, you know Mary spent many years working for CPS. The last 9 of her career as our superintendent. right? That there's nowhere in urban superintendencies does a district get 9 years worth of an effective superintendent.
I think the board members should be more.
Well, they do, yes, we are very
That's
grateful.
another reason why I lasted too. It's true, you need to get along with your board members
Yeah.
and give them credit for all their hard work.
Yep. Yeah, and so you all take advantage, having a unicorn in the room, right? And ask lots of good questions, listening to her experience. Rick has also spent his career working in service to kids and families in Cincinnati and was a board member from 99 to 07, is that right?
Yes.
99 to 07, and he was elected board president unprecedented 3 times. So we have a lot of wisdom in this room, so definitely take advantage of that. And let's see, why don't we go around, you all just say your names too, so that I think Mary and Rick are making maps, so they know whoever it is while you're talking. All right, so we'll start right here.
Oh, Jasmine Clifton-Foray. Right now, my role is Director of Allied Development for Public Allied Cincinnati. I have worked in CPS, I'm a product of CPS, I'm a CPS parent. When I worked in CPS, I did out of school time, so I did summer school, after school, anything that wasn't like teaching, I've pretty much done it, and I love it, and that's kind of like become my passion, so.
Thanks, Jasmine.
I'm Tess Brown. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications with Rising Community Funds. It's a good community foundation in Northern Kentucky. I live in Mount Auburn and very passionate about the city of Cincinnati and its families and children. So welcome.
Thanks, Tess.
Heather Couch, I'm a school counselor at Clemson Latin School in Clemson, Kentucky. And I live in Columbia.
Thanks, Heather.
Marlena Greenfield. I am a resident of Green Township, parent advocate. I am a co-sponsor of a LGBTQIAA Alliance.
Dater,
High
right?
school. Yes,
Okay.
Dater. And I serve on the LSDMC. I am also part of the board's new strategic engagement planning committee. I will be a co-presenter at a public education town hall tomorrow. Too many hats.
Thanks, Marlena. All right.
I'm Elise. I live in the East End. I work with Riverview East on the LSD-MC, but more of my time, even more than that, believe it or not, is with the Cincinnati, Greater Cincinnati STEM Collaborative, which is working to get more STEM capability in our students.
Elise, thanks, Elise. All right.
I'm Shanda Davis, I'm a senior engineer at Procter & Gamble. I have board membership at Northwestern University on their mechanical engineering department board. I'm an advocate for STEM, but for all things education.
Thanks, Jada.
I'm David Brenner. I am a CPS graduate and CPS parent and lifelong Cincinnati resident. I'm a IT professional, been at most of the big companies here in town. I am also on the Strategic Engagement Planning Committee. I'm a board member with Tri-State Freethinkers. I am serving my second term as an LSDMC member at San Montessori. And I ran for a position on the board last year.
Thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Heather Gricker. I am the Director of Professional Development for American Montessori Society, and I want to increase social emotional and love support for CPS families and staff.
Great, thanks, Heather. All right, so that is our crew. As other people join us, we'll make sure that they introduce themselves too. Before we move past this slide though, go ahead and make sure everybody writes down the email addresses on the facilitators line, so that if you need to get in touch with these two afterwards, if you have any questions about anything they said, you know how to get in touch with them.
Is that email correct for like a .cc?
Yep.
Oh, 3 C's or
No,
2
2
C's?
C's.
Okay.
Yep, you got it. All right, so, perfect time, we were just introducing. Go ahead and take a seat, Kareem, then we'll use it, just introduce yourself. Yeah.
Come on, come on.
Yeah, that's right. So while Kareem is getting settled, I will, just let you know too that, so we know you all did a lot of pre-work for this session, so just to make sure everybody knows, the reason behind that was, our goal was for you to get lots of context set, kind of a broad-based knowledge, so that we could spend our time with these experts really diving deeper into the learning, right? So instead of having, Mary stand up here here for 10 minutes telling you what the sunshine laws are. You can read what the sunshine laws are, and we can take that 10 minutes to hear how it's been applied in the district, right? What were some of the experiences that Mary Rig had?
We all got sued in the district.
Exactly. That is one of the stories Mary will tell you about. So we'll spend our time on that, and that's why we ask that you do all that pre-work. So hopefully we're just assuming everyone did that and are coming in with that knowledge. All right, Kareem, do you want to quickly tell us your name and any CPS related stuff about you?
I'm Kareem Moffett. I am the chair of the LSC. I have a son, the last one that's graduating this year. You know,
Yeah.
and I ran for school board last year. I'm very actually interested to learn. I actually need to get the knowledge of, I don't want to say elders, those that are wiser. And so,
She said, I don't want to.
Thank you, Kareem. Okay, so this is what we're going to be going over tonight. So, as you all know, I did lots of research, lots of conversations to figure out what is it that you all really needed to know. One of the things that in that research and in those conversations that just screamed out that you needed to know was the difference between governance and management, right? So that came up almost every time I was in kind of a coffee meeting or on the phone with someone who was telling me that they were interested in running for a school board. So many times the things that they were telling me they were passionate about weren't actually things that school board members did, right? So one woman I was talking with was talking about things like, she said every time she calls customer service, she either doesn't get an answer or gets a wrong answer. She had applied for a job in CPS and the application process was a mess, and she wanted to run board because she wanted to clean up the operations of CPS. And I had to break it to her that is not a board member's role, right? That the day-to-day operations are actually the administration's role. And oftentimes, one of the things that people run on, that I ran on myself, was around community engagement. And that is important, but a lot of times the things that I hear people say, and quite frankly, things I said too, before I knew more and I knew better, were actually community engagement pieces that are not part of the board's role. And so what that leads to, when people are talking about things they want to do on the campaign trail that aren't actually the board's role, it leads to either you're not able to fulfill a campaign promise, or in order to fulfill it, you have to actually step out of your lane and into the administration's lane in order to do it. And so that was one big thing that came up in the governance versus management. But kind of what I also learned in this research was that in that understanding of what your role was, there was really not a lot of people knew actually like how do you actually do the work, right? And so people would say like, you know, when I got in the role of board member, I didn't know, does like one board member do work? Do all of them do it together? Do they do it in meetings? Does the administration do it and then pass it to the board to review? Can you do work outside of meetings? Like just in general, how does the work happen? And then other big questions were always about the administration, right? And just saying like when I first started as a board member, I didn't know who did what, how the administration was set up, if I could just go talk to people in the administration, kind of all of those things. So it wasn't just knowing governance versus management, but it was also the application of that, right? Like once I understand what my job is, how do I do my job? And so that's where this came from. So those are the things we're going to talk about tonight, and then we're also going to hopefully, if we can have some time, we'll see how much time we spend for the rest of the things. Career Paths is going to come up here kind of every time from here on out in all of our sessions with all of our panels. One of the things that you all are trying to figure out is what seat you want to make your impact from, right? Do I want to run for board? Is there some other seat I want to make my impact from? And so we have all of these people coming to us who are coming from so many different experiences. And so what I'm going to hopefully do is spend about 10 minutes in each of our sessions from here on out, just hearing from our facilitators and our panelists about their journeys, so you can hear more about the experiences they've had, organizations they've worked with or worked for. So as you're kind of thinking about what you want to do, hopefully you'll be learning about new opportunities too, and can ask them about that along the way. So, and then we'll always save some time for our reflection at the end and our logistics. One other thing that's not up here though, if people want to and have the capacity to stay after 6:30, one of the things that's come up from a couple of folks was there was a tweet by the Hamilton County GOP over the weekend that was not very complimentary about CPS. I know number of us posted it. Jasmine and I were emailing about it, and we were saying folks might want to talk about it. We have a packed agenda, but I am going to stay afterwards in case anyone does want to stay after. Jasmine, did you want to say in just like a sentence or two why you thought people might want to talk about it?
Yeah, because I feel like, if we're gonna be on the board, it's important for us to understand, like, how we're viewed. And, you know, in the times that we're in, the thing that keeps coming up is like, you need to listen to what the other person is talking about, and like, how do we not just dismiss things right off and say like, well, what can we find in this, and what do we need to do to combat that? Perception. So, I thought it was interesting, I thought it was necessary, so I know some people don't feel comfortable talking about it, that's fine, you don't have to.
Thank you. So that's why I figured we'd save some time at the end. Yes, I'd be very curious too. I don't know, Rick and Mary have somewhere to go afterwards too, but I'd be so curious for their input too, right? I was telling Jasmine one story, and then we'll get back on track here of, so Carolyn Jones, the current board president, she and I and Mary all went to Council of Great City Schools conference a couple years ago. It was right before the November 2016 presidential election, and they had a debate between a Hillary delegate and a Trump delegate, an education discussion and debate. The Trump delegate was actually a Buffalo school board member. So when we get to talking later about being on the board, it's something to keep in mind, right? You do not get to pick the people who sit next to you on the board. And so he was an actual board member in Buffalo, and the things coming out of his mouth, I mean, there was booing in the room, there was gasping in the room, the poor moderator trying to keep the discussion civil, and Carolyn and I were like, what the whole time? We're saying, like, is this for real? Is this an act? No one can actually, right? And so we're walking out, we're all riled up, and Mary Cronin, who has seen everything, simply says, well, it's always good to know how the other side thinks. Right? That was it. It was like, I am not spending my emotional or mental energy on this man. We got work to do, people, right? And it was such this moment, I'm going, that's why we learn from the wisdom of others.
That's how we survive.
Yep.
But, you know, I mean, we don't want to spend a lot of time on this. That is the importance of your role. Remember, when you're an elected official, even though it's a private comment on your private Twitter feed, the very fact that you're an elected official, it's spread all over.
Yep.
And even though I agree with Mike Morawski, it made me wince because then it got the Republicans beaten up on the district 48 hours before the report card was released. So if I could still, Superintendent, I'd be going,
Yep.
you know, this isn't good, and I don't think you realize, even though it's private, free speech and everything, you are an elected official, and what you say on Twitter is gonna be picked up.
Yep. Yep.
Even when you run, what you say on Twitter. Yeah, because they troll your page and they're like, you said this. It's like, yes, I did say that.
Yeah, I know, but.
I've erased all my feeds before I.
It's pretty tough.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. One parameter I do want to set, I was thinking about this, that this isn't just for this session, but kind of for all of our sessions moving forward, is really thinking about when we are asking questions tonight of Rick and Mary, when we're asking questions moving forward, we're gonna be meeting lots of people who work in the district or have worked in the district, really kind of approaching those questions, comments, concerns with humility. And with an understanding that I think anyone who works in the district knows that there are things going really well and places where we have miles left to go, right? And I think if anyone knows it, it's the people who are working so closely with it. At the same time, we also know that there are just, I think those of us who have worked so closely with folks, and hopefully you all, as you get to know a lot of the people who are doing the work in the district, will come to know that there are just such good, smart, dedicated, hardworking people who are putting in and day out their time trying to figure out how do we, create better opportunities for kids. And so really thinking like not to, I don't want to dismiss any concerns, but your concerns are your concerns and they are true and they are valid. But just really thinking about how there's likely somebody who is doing that work and there's some sort of barrier that's in their way and they're spending every day figuring out how to go over, under, around that barrier. And so really just thinking that there are people who have been doing this work for years before us, they're gonna be doing it for years after us. And so the best way to really learn is to kind of approach these conversations with a level of humility and understanding for the people who are on the ground doing the work. So with that, some kind of overview of some information about governance and management, and then we're going to do a quick kind of game to check for understanding, and then we're going to spend most of our time in this section hearing some examples from Rick and Mary about their experiences. So, Rick, do you want to hit on some highlights from the distinction between governance and management?
Yes, but I would like to use what you said just before you mentioned my name as a segue.
Okay.
Because just in meeting you and how you interact, you all, and the fact that you're here, more than likely one day you're gonna be on school board because you already are doing so many things toward doing that successfully. And that speech about humility and understanding that there's someone who is trying to work on whatever you see is wrong, and they are trying to get past those barriers. If you walk into the room as the newbie with that attitude, you will be great. What typically happens in situations of electeds, and it's not about school board, it's any situation where there are elected people. The new people tend to arrive as finally, the answer is here. And we are here to fix it. And you old people who have been there, not that you've been, these people who have been there for a while, clearly they don't know what they're doing because we have all of these issues. So, to be able to walk in with that kind of an attitude and armed with the knowledge of this is a huge step forward from how most people walk into the situation. One of the things about governance and management, in these types of conversations, it is often totally divided in that way, and never the two shall ever mix. And to complicate this, that's not true. So there are going to be times when you are with management, doing management things, and especially the superintendent is with school board doing governance things. Also, separate from those times, you have management responsibilities, and that is to manage yourself and to manage the board. The president of the board will have added responsibilities for managing the board, but there are going to be people who don't know this and will, in many situations, just breach that rule forever. And it's going to be your responsibility to manage them in that. And then there are people who will know all of this and know it well and choose to ignore it because they have a need for disruption at that moment. And you will have to manage that too. And the best way to manage it is to be armed with it so that it becomes an armor for you. It becomes something other than how you guide you. It becomes how you become an asset to that board as you are helping to guide others. And the worst thing about all of this is that the community doesn't know it and doesn't understand it. And they will make the comments like some of you may have made when you thought of running. I need to fix the fact that they don't return my phone call. And so when you are engaging with them, they will, why don't you fix the fact that nobody will return my phone call? And so another great reason to be experiencing what you're experiencing now and to understand this and to embrace it is because you're going to constantly be in a mode of educating the public about these facts and about these responsibilities and roles and separation.
All right, well, thank you. So you all got to read this slide, so hopefully you know the what versus the how, policy versus implementation. We gave a couple examples here, right, that, the board will come up with a policy on, for example, attendance, but the implementation is going to be on the administration, right? They're gonna teach they're training their teachers on it and their staff, and they're gonna have to communicate with parents, all of that. And so really understanding where your lane is and where the administration's lane is important. And I think echoing Rick, you knowing it means you do it yourself, but you're also gonna be responsible for helping rein in your other board members when they are not. And we will get to that later on, because that's the difficult part. So before we move on to kind of the deeper dive, we want to make sure we get this, so we're going to do a quick game. So, there are some cards in front of you. Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to put up a question on the board. Get in pairs, so I guess the end here, maybe David, Chanda, and Elise, you can be a triplet, a three group. Using first the set of cards that has on it a picture of a group of people together. That will be,
There's an extra set under.
yeah, because we had any other. So that's going to be, if you think, I'm going to give you a question, if you think it's the board's responsibility, you'll hold up a picture of those people. If you think it's the administration's responsibility, you'll hold up a picture of the school. If you just don't know, that is okay. You'll hold up this guy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a question up there. We'll give you like 10 seconds to turn to your partners near you, decide what you think it is, and then I'll say hold it up and hold up one of those. Got it? All right, let's do it. So first question, who determines an individual school's specific dress code? Talk to each other. All right, hold up which one do you think it is? Hold it up, hold it up. Do we maybe have an I don't know group? That's okay to hold up your I don't know. All right, good. It is, in fact, the administration. Yay! So, in this case, the board comes up with a policy, right? Our policy is 5511, dress and grooming. But the implementation of that, what's the specific one for each school? Each school comes up with that.
Like if you want a red golf shirt or a blue golf shirt or a white golf shirt to go with the khaki pants.
Yep.
So my question is, why would that be different based on a specific school? Like if we are, like, why would that administration take extra time to create something separate for their school and not just go with what the board has already set up?
So I think in general, we try to have,
There's
right?
schools that have no uniforms at all.
Yeah.
So if we tried to say you all wear khaki pants and then maybe blue shirt, people would be upset just because you're trying to make 60 schools look like that.
Well, no, I'm saying the other way though. Like I was a woman, we didn't have,
You know,
we
you
didn't
gotta wear
have,
uniforms.
yeah, we didn't wear uniforms. Like, so why do this whole policy where usually in neighborhoods that are experiencing poverty, like why take the time to do that in a specific school? Like make that an issue. You know, like why not just do what the board does, like has set forth for the whole district? I just feel like that's extra.
Yeah, so I think it's the difference between equity and equality, right? So some schools want uniforms because it is much more economical for their families. And so it's up to the school to decide what makes sense for your school. So instead of imposing on every school, you must do it exactly this way, the board puts out guidance in the policy, and then each school decides what's right for your school. Were you gonna add to that? I'm sorry, I think.
I was only gonna say that the policy tends to be broader
Okay.
and just don't go outside of these confines.
Okay.
Have some minimums,
That makes
and then the schools can then work with it.
Green just did it.
I was gonna say, at Woodrow, when I first got there, we were under Ms. Johnson, she had ties and khaki pants, and that was the culture she wanted to create for her school. And it really does kind of inform, I'm kind of either way, but it does inform the culture that is there based on, you know, the colors of the schools. Some schools, well, we say to like you usually wear orange, well, their colors are red, so that makes, you know, it just impacts their culture. And some schools, if you're specific to a business, maybe that's what you want, is a business attire to go with that.
I get that. I just, on the other side of that, I look at who our standards are in the district, when we look at like, who are the schools that we hold up, and we don't make them wear uniforms. And so, what are we saying about that? What does that mean, and like, what does it mean about choice? What does it mean about those types of things? So,
I'm confused, I just wanna clarify, what you said, you said who we pulled out, what's that?
yeah, in the district, like, you can look at a Walnut and say like, look at Walnut and the culture there. Like, people are excelling for excellence, and people want, you know, they make these great strides in academic success. And so when you look at like, when people are enforcing, uniforms, they're saying like, oh, well, it helps behavior issues, or it helps this, or it helps that. And it's like, I don't necessarily see a correlation for that, is all I'm saying. I can understand if that's what a principal decides. I'm just saying, like, when I usually see that, it gives me pause. That's all.
It's not the principal who decides, parents have to
That's
decide.
right.
What cities months lead time to buy the uniforms, so it's really, although the principal can push it, but it's really the
It's
LSD.
usually LSD. And I think that's the key, is that nobody is making anyone wear a uniform or not wear a uniform. The school is deciding if they want to wear a uniform or not wear a uniform.
And the school is in the LSTC.
Because it can be a headache for the principal trying to enforce it,
Right.
Yeah.
all that
Yes.
mess, so see, it's.
Yeah, no, I've seen that, so.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But then from a practical standpoint, often the LCMC is a rubber stamp of what the principal wants.
That's not true.
Depends on your own. It's been
Sometimes.
true.
It should be true, it should be true, that's why I prefaced it with it from a practical standpoint.
Because your LSMC is made up of your principal and your parents and your teachers, so in theory, you should have a well-rounded.
It should work.
Yes, let's try another one. So who decides if the consideration of controversial issues has a legitimate place in the instructional program of the schools? Who decides this big question? I gave you a hint. Who decides a big question like this? All right, hold it up. We can say it enough. There you go. All right, let's see. This one. Board. Okay, so this one again, this is like a big question, right? So we have a policy called controversial issues. You should look at it. It's pretty interesting, right? So it's about, like, the policy actually says that what our goal is to build citizens who are going to know how to interact in the world, then we should teach them how to engage around controversial issues in the classroom. So that's actually a policy question. So that one is in the board. Yes. Let's try the next one here. I swear I'm not trying to be like dramatic. It's just not clicking. Would you grab this stuff? There you go. So who decides? This one's kind of tricky. Who decides the priority order for enrollment in high schools? So priority order means like if there are more applicants for a high school than there are seats, who's deciding what that order should be of who gets those seats? Go ahead and hold it up. Feel free to say, I don't know. This is a tricky one. Oh, see, this is a tricky one.
Here's a set.
All right. This one's actually the board. And you want to know, okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this one because this one's tricky. So, in board policy, there was nothing about priority order. A lot of the work you're going to do as a board will and should come from the administration. If the majority of your stuff's coming from the board that is not where all of your direction should be coming from. The administration is the people who are doing on-the-ground, day-to-day work, and they're the ones who should be elevating things to the board. We had a board policy around high school enrollment that most of our policy, like Rick said, is kind of high level and gives you kind of bumpers, right, guidelines. The administration came to us, though, after a couple years of doing the high school lottery, and said, we don't know what to do when we have more applicants for our high school than there are seats. And so we're using our best guesses based on what we know the values of the district are. But we don't know if that's right. And so it actually took months and months, almost a year's worth of work from the board. And we'll get into kind of how that happened later. But this was kind of, once this was raised, we realized it was kind of emblematic of a larger issue, which was our enrollment policies were not equitable or transparent, and they also weren't consistent across enrollment. So between magnet or high school or preschool, they were not consistent. And so this issue not only had the board trying to think about what would that priority order be, but once we come up with the priority order, we wanted it to be one that we could use for magnet enrollment or kind of any of our enrollments. And so this became, instead of kind of an administrative task, it was a big picture question of like, who should get priority when we're out of seats. And so we're gonna dive into this example a little bit later, but that one is kind of like an unusual one or a tricky one, but a good example of when an issue is relegated from the administration. Yes.
So is another role of the board to take those things on and be like, administration is dealing with these things, but it should really be us?
Yep.
Is it to like,
Yep, so we talked within this, the administration came to us saying like, administration shouldn't be making the call of if, do siblings get priority? What if you're out of district and you've been in the school district for a while? Do you get priority over somebody who's in district but is just just joining CPS, like, those were kind of like more,
It was very messy,
Yeah.
and we needed guidance, because every call you make is questioned by the parent who then
Sure.
calls board members. And that's why we finally said, we have to have something here to tell us which way to go.
That makes sense.
last one. Who chooses how many more AP classes to add and which AP courses to add in each school? Go ahead, hold on.
This is what I do.
All right,
My primary school.
go ahead and hold it up. You got it, trust yourself, trust yourself. That one's the administration, right? So the board sets a policy about equity and education. Again, this is an example where it's not equal, it's equitable, right? So Mary is not gonna then say, everybody has to have AP geology at your buildings, right? Instead, she's gonna say, we need to be offering AP courses at all of our buildings, and then each building site will decide what's right for their building.
And if you have 3,000 kids, you'll have 30 AP classes. If you have 150 high school students, you'll try to have 2 in English and maybe in math, whereas you just don't have the children in full classes.
Yep.
So along those lines, if you look at Vision 2020 and the programs that were put into each of the individual schools, was that board or administration that made those calls as to which programs went to each school?
The schools did. So that's a great question. So the board assignment, so I think maybe I can talk about that part, and then Mary talks about how it got picked up. So the board assignment was about, this is when we had this, we're trying to get more high quality seats, right, into Cincinnati. And so we were also talking about equity in our neighborhood schools. So we had these 2 conversations happening at once. The assignment from the board to the administration, we weren't the ones saying, we know exactly how to do this, right? It is not our J job to know that. We have education professionals working every day on that. So what we said was, what could we do in our neighborhood schools to make them more equitable? So we kind of go on this 2-tiered system of these magnet schools and then neighborhood schools, and to kind of improve the results at all of our schools. Administration then went off and researched what they could do, and they came back with this Vision 2020, where each neighborhood school would work in their community to decide what programming they wanted at their school. And there's an application process, so like my school's going through it right now. So we're holding a series of community engagement conversations. I know a bunch of schools just, for this year, just did this as well, and then you literally fill out an application with what you want your school to be and what your evidence is, and you turn it into administration. Or Mary, if you wanna say what happens from there.
And then sometimes even that gets messy, because there was one school who chose dance. Well, they were struggling academically, and, it was, sometimes you gotta go back and say, maybe it should be broader, maybe you could look at arts as opposed to just dance. So you're trying to work with the school to, since it was the parents and the community that wanted it, but maybe make it broader and more inclusive than just dance.
So then where's the line between program and then curriculum? Because the board signs up on all curriculum.
Board signs off on curriculum, board should not be involved in
Writing it.
writing curriculum. Yeah, go ahead, Mary, what other things did the board members step right into your world on?
Yeah, choosing the books, all that kind of stuff, that gets, it's best, in fact, just textbook selections. We have teams of teachers who come together with the curriculum managers to make a recommendation for the board to approve. But just having the 7 board members there, sitting there paging through books probably isn't the best.
There's probably 1 or 2 that would want to.
Yes.
There always are, yes, and that's when it just gets kind of awkward, or wants to come to the meetings where the teachers are meeting. And if you have a board member sitting there, let's say, is that Marissa back there, like back where she is, sitting in the room listening to everything you say and then kind of throwing stuff out, that really doesn't be the teachers who are having the discussion about what book. So it can be awkward, and certainly with the administrators in the room, then they say nothing, because they don't want to step on board members' toes, so it's awkward.
And
And I will say there's often external temptations to do that. It's not that someone thinks, I want to make textbook decisions. It's because some vendor is going to the board level because they want the money to come to the vendor and they're influencing the decision makers about the money. And that's when you have people who sit in the room or sit back and go over a few things for their favorite vendor who gave them a check to school board.
Yeah, that gets dicey, that gets dicey.
Doesn't that violate the conflict of interest policy? I mean, that's explicitly called out.
But you may know that, but the other board members may not be aware, you know?
Yeah.
So I did have so I'm glad the example was what it was, because I do have a question about that. So from what I understand then, like, it's really a discussion amongst the community and administration in regards to like specific AP courses.
Okay.
I am creating this world. This is a world that doesn't exist, for
Okay.
example, okay? But like, I can imagine in my head, like, there might be a school that is like, when their community gets together and the administration says, okay, well, we will give you, maybe you guys need to work on just basic math. So we're not gonna offer AP calculus, right? And then, but over here, it's like, okay, you guys are scoring high on math, so we will offer AP calculus, we'll offer AP trig, and it's like, it's a general kind, we're using like, for whatever reason, that's the choice, but then you have talent, you have kids that, even in a school that maybe there's one or two that could be struggling with math, why not allow for there to be that AP Calc and Chem? And then, so you could then, going up further into like the stratosphere of like how that then is perceived, is like, well, you are kind of self-selecting your kids out of these abilities to learn. So when I think, I feel like just in that example, that can get into a place.
It does get
where-
messy, and honestly, your example is dead on, there's one child in the whole building. So now what do? Because you're offering a class for one child, so then those other 24 children during that 45-minute period have to go with some other teacher in the building and overload their classes. So it does get messy. We try to say if you've got 8 or 9 students, that's probably enough for a class, but it does get awkward. There are online opportunities, because online you can take an AP class and then sit for the test. But that is a problem, because in some schools you have no problem filling the class. In another school, you might only have 1 or 2, and then it's that way for almost every AP class. So it's messy and it's hard.
Okay. But that's also the work that Mary did with her team for the last bunch of years, right? So one of the things that we raised was exactly what you're saying, was we realized there were some schools that had 0 AP classes. And so Mary and her team figured out, how do we do this remotely? And so now every school offers at least 5 AP classes. And some of those are remote because there's only a couple of kids in the class, and they're Skyping in somewhere else in order to take that AP.
We did a
class.
roving band of teachers who would maybe stop in one day a week to meet with you. You couldn't be there 5 days a week to try to figure out how we could do that.
Sam?
Yeah, good question on the idea of meeting with the community and having them decide school, but, I've worked on a lot of those kind of things with UC, and UC has their own idea of what the community is, so they reach out to those people. How did you all do that? I'm wondering if it's the same way where the board, the administration has their idea of what the community is, so they reach out to those people that they think represents community. And a lot of people get like that.
So those are, you'll say those are, the schools are doing their outreach, but I think that is something we're always concerned about. What do you say, Mary?
Oh, yeah, it's a concern that maybe, you're right, maybe the LSDMC isn't very active and the principal reached out to a handful of people who maybe really didn't represent the community. Oh, yeah, that can happen, and then the board usually hears about it, or I hear about it, and of course, we think the community is involved, but it's really a couple of people. We've run into those messes in the past, certainly.
Some of our schools have now taken to using, people like, who, so Darlene came on, she did the community engagement for schools that they're already working with through the community learning center stuff. So they have folks in the schools who actually know all the kids and parents. So then, when an opportunity like this came up, she was able to do true community engagement, right? Because she already had that trust built with the school community. I think those are the ones where we're seeing kind of the best
Yeah.
Vision 2020
And she
ideas
wasn't an
coming from.
employee, she was like a
Yeah.
consultant, so she was like one step away from us to try to,
And we're going through the same thing at my kid's school right now, is if you just send out an email saying there's this meeting, we're gonna get the same people in the room. So we actually have an outside consultant too, who's not associated with Kilgore or with CPS, who is kind of this neutral ground that Mary's talking about to try to kind of bring folks together. I did wanna make sure that we have time to kind of hit some of our objectives here. And so, our first one here is understanding the difference, right? So, and I think what Rick talked about right away when we got here was saying, it's messy, right? Like, it would be awesome if all of this was black and white, but it's not always. But the more you talk about it, the more you understand it, the more you'll know what is my job as a board member, what is not. And I think getting to this second objective here is where we're gonna dive now. Is really believing that when board members stay in their lane and administrators in theirs, it can really just make sure that we're all getting the work done. And then this one here, when we did our pre-survey for you all, of like what you felt like you already knew, this one, not shockingly, was one that scored the lowest. What do I actually do if someone breaches the protocol? And so, I'm gonna turn it back over again to Rick to kind of just talk about, yeah, some of these examples, like what do we actually do? All right, so, yes, so Rick, talking about what should we do when we see a breach in protocol. This is the actual bylaw, so I know you guys are starting to read through all the bylaws and protocols, but there's pages and pages of them. So why don't we just take a couple of seconds and read this one here? This is officially what you do if protocol is a breach. And then it would be, what we were hoping for was that kind of, from different seats, from Rick's seat as having been a board member and board president, if he could give an example, without using names, of, you know, when this happened, what he did, how it played out for him, and then Mary's
you
seat.
can't think of one, I got a couple.
I'm sure he's like,
Because you're going back 10 years, it's hard.
And
Oh,
then,
no, it's not.
right. And then from Mary's seat, it's a very different seat, right? I mean, she used to say to us, I have 7 bosses. That is a hard position to be in when you know somebody is clearly breaching the protocol. What do you do from the administration seat? So I'll let them take it away and give us a couple examples of when this has happened.
The best time, the easiest way to handle this when it happens is understanding the motivation behind it. There are some times when it happens, and this is quite innocent in that it's someone who just either doesn't know any better because of the complication of the situation, or there's passion around the issue. And that also can be a driver to get someone out of the lane. Those are easier to do, to manage. It's the times when people absolutely know better and they have other reasons to be getting out of that lane that makes this difficult. So, but these sort of levels, this should be viewed as what you do first, and then what you do second, and what you do third. Unfortunately, sometimes you do all of those things, and it doesn't matter. I am determined, I am gonna stay out of this lane, because the reason I'm out of that lane is not the issue any longer, it's to be disruptive. Or it is because you will buy from that vendor, because, you know, those things sort of creep in. That's, from my perspective, that is when what's not on this page has to kick in, which is, that is typically one person, and you are a board of 7, and you have to move forward correctly with the majority of the board doing the right thing. You will take opportunities to never sort of berate a board member publicly, but to remind either that board member or the community what the correct protocol is, what the correct processes are, while you are following them. You use those moments to educate the public as you move forward. Typically, the rest of the board knows fully what's happening and with that person who just wants to be disruptive. But these things tend to work, follow in that sequence most of the time. It is not often that you have someone who intentionally wants to be disruptive and get out of the way.
Yeah, go check.
So, cause what I heard in there, too, like in addition to what's said, is like, there are also norms, right? Like norms, so like, the norm is not to berate or chastise a board member, I guess, in public. What I have found recently is that if it's a norm, then people don't typically, like, then you can't really hold people accountable for following it. So, you know, you follow me? Okay, you got it, right? So like so I was just curious, like, so, and then I also think too that sometimes norms do get in the way of like, us really getting to the issue. So I was just curious, what are your thoughts about that? Like you know, I call it a come to Jesus moment, right? Like, and like, what if you do have to, because it gets so bad,
Yes.
that we do have to make a statement and say, I disagree, and this is why I disagree. Like, you know what I mean, and kind of break those norms.
Well, one of the advantages of just the structure of things is, again, you have a group of 7 people and 6 people can proceed to move on. Also part of that structure is a board president. Yes, 3 years. And it was back to back to back. And so I'm thinking of all of these situations, and you're probably chuckling in your head of those, the very moments you're describing. But again, first of all, you don't have to be board president to follow what I'm about to say. You can calmly ask for the floor and calmly talk about the fact that, well, we have agreed behaviorally to do such and such and such and such, so now let's. And I was talking to her, so she told me that someone in here has child psychology. You would be surprised how the other skills that you use in the rest of your life come to play with this, and you don't have to be so married to rules and norms. There are societal norms that are just as legitimate as agreed board norms. And you'd be surprised how easy it is to use those, because then it is not just 6 board members who are saying, yeah, it's the community saying, yeah, because these are societal norms that you're starting to break as you are, you know, whatever you're doing. I do remember one board member who wanted to make a point and threatened to get on the table and dance. I will get on this table and I will walk from one end, you know, one of those, that was her way of coming to Jesus. Jesus had nothing to do with it. But I do remember wanting to say, can we get back to the board member before you begin your career of performing on a table? But I didn't. All I said was, does anyone else have to make a point to make about and then move it right back to what we're talking about and why we're there? Because often behind the shenanigans and the breaches is self-service, and that's not what this is about. So when you can just move it right back to the work, that works most often.
And Mary, from your seat, it was so different, right? Because you saw this happen often. Even just the 4 years we worked together, there were times that we found out that there were board members doing things that they should not to Mary's administration. So do you have an example that you wanted to give
hours before we get together. What? So there were some incredible reaches like that threw something out in the public that she wanted that hadn't been agreed upon, and another one I can think of, we were negotiating with a business who was gonna work with the school, and suddenly a contract appeared out of nowhere. Now, the board thought the administration had put it together. Of course, I thought, the board had put it together, and neither one of us had. It was one board member had written it. So there were just all kinds of situations like that were very awkward. And then it is awkward for the administration because I do have 7 bosses. How do I go and make you do something? You're really my boss. But I would call the board president or the board vice president and say, I think we have a situation here. And oftentimes, they were just hearing about it for the first time also.
And that one, I just want to finish off Mary's example. So this is in our bylaw. So again, taking a minute, public expression of members. The first sentence, the board president functions as the official spokesperson for the board. This is one that I think is breached more than any other protocol. And I can remember exactly the time that Mary was talking about, because I saw that on the news too. It was like, I mean, really. And so this one is so important, and it's so hard because as a board member, you have lots of opinions. You are not a city council person. There is a big difference between being a board member and a city council person. City council people are all individuals who can speak individually and vote individually and do all of that. As a board member, you are not to take any board position and speak publicly about it. Once the board has, right, when the board's debating things, you're all individuals, right? When you are all in a board meeting and you're debating a topic in a board meeting in public, you say whatever is on your mind. If you want to tell them you're going to dance on the tables, you can say that. You say it however you want. That's where all the discussion and debate happens. Once a decision is made, you are not to go to the public saying, well, the board voted this, but I really still thought that. You are a board. You are now speaking as a board. That is what you do. So to Mary's example though, the reason we have these protocols and bylaws is because only the board president is the one who's supposed to speak for the board. So as you'll see later, we'll talk about board structure. There's also committee chairs, and sometimes the committee chairs are actually the ones who know the most about a topic. And so the board president will say, in my case, I was a policy committee chair when we were redoing the Magna policy. Ooh, that was fun. But the board president would often say, Elisa, you talk to the press because you know the most about it. So if the board president gives you the authority, you can talk. But like Mary said, there had been no decision made yet, and this person was not the board president. And that's the stuff that happens often. That's also, like we talked about in the beginning, that tweet is so hard because even though Mike never said, as a member of the CPS board, he knows enough, he would never say he's talking for the board, but you are perceived as speaking for CPS, which is what makes, we're gonna have a conversation next about community engagement and constituent response. That's what makes community engagement so tricky, because if you're individually going to different groups and organizations and community councils, you have to very clearly stay in line with, you cannot give your personal opinions, you can only be talking about things that have been decided as a board. So that gets really tricky, but those are some, I think, some good examples of times when board members have stepped out of the lane and how we pull them in, and I guess maybe.
Did you get called a lot from the press?
Yes.
See, that's
I was
what would
thinking
happen.
the same
thing.
Yes.
Go for it. Talk
Board
about it.
president,
Yeah.
but Elisa gets called for opinion, you get called, so now you got 3 different board members saying contradictory things in the press. Ooh, it's messy.
And they know that it's supposed to be the board president.
Yep.
And so,
But they intentionally don't call you.
yeah, community wants to take you out of these correct roles and lanes also.
I would get emails or phone calls from press all the time. And my response was always, you need to talk to the board president, right? Or I could sometimes, if it was something I thought, well, maybe they're calling me because I'm policy chair, I'd call the board and say, I need to call the board president first and get his or her approval that I'm the one that's gonna be talking about this. Because otherwise, like Mary's right, you all read those articles. We have quotes from a bunch of different board members and they're not all aligned. Jessica.
So when you are elected or before you run is when they give you the bylaws to know? That's my first question.
So the bylaws are on the public website, right? So anybody who is running, you would think it would be a good idea to know the bylaws of the board. I think most people probably don't know them, and I think to Rick's point, the public doesn't know them. So the public doesn't actually know what's your job and not your job. So that's how I think you also often get roped into things that aren't actually your job.
Okay, so I think it's necessary to always have a code of conduct and bylaws and things of that nature. I'm just thinking about, if we wanna expand the board and we want our board and our leadership to look like the communities that they're coming from, like, I wouldn't know the bylaws, I hadn't come to school board's board,
Yep.
and like, you know, I would have expected like somebody to like hand it to me if I got elected. And so thinking about how do we make that, accessible, like, and like tell people that they need to like go here if we wanna be on school board or whatever. But also like,
Welcome to the purpose of school board school.
no, that's exactly it. But also thinking about, the thing that made me chuckle was the idea of peer-to-peer. Because how does, I feel like that can get very messy too. You know, like, if you are speaking on, if we know that you're not supposed to speak on behalf of the board, and you do it anyway, and then like one person comes up to you and pulls you to the side, like, I feel like that can get very messy, instead of like, as a board saying, this is not what you're supposed to do, and like, let's remind everybody, and if it happens again, like, whatever. So, explain to me how peer-to-peer is supposed to look.
It depends on the situation, and it's just your own judgment in
Okay.
that regard.
Okay.
If you are a new board member and that happens, it's just kind of easy on a peer-to-peer basis to have a private conversation about, you know, board member is, the rule is, that sort of thing. But we have had, and I'm sure Mary can attest to, many executive sessions about the lunatic who intentionally reach these things and intentionally caused issues with a desire for disruption. There really was a board member that I finally decided, even though I didn't go to school for mental personality issues, that she was just so bored when things weren't messy and just bored, and so therefore had to get things messy. Those were not peer-to-peer, that was a group.
That was a group, okay. So there is some grace for people who are starting out or who may not understand and know the protocol.
It'd be like a board retreat at the beginning to go over these
Okay,
things.
okay, I'm just wondering.
And I think, like Rick was saying too, like, so one time I know, an example from my own experience was, one of my fellow board members, had said to me, I'd sent an email to one of the assistant superintendents for some information and copied the board, and she pulled me aside and was like, remember, protocol, you only ask Mary, and Mary will send it to that assistant superintendent, and I was like, oh, you're right. And it wasn't as a like, it was like, I'm a new board member, I needed it, he's the one who I know, will get it to me, but she was absolutely right, and it was not, so that is very different, that was like, she knew it was an honest mistake from a rookie board member.
Yeah.
It was very different than somebody who has a camera crew in front of a building.
Yeah.
So, in that case, the whole board addressed that issue.
And you, as you're thinking about this, and you are not on the board and you don't know all the other board members, it sounds like it's, I'm a stranger that I remember you're working together, you meet often, you're a group already, you have a group dynamic, and within that defined group dynamic, a lot of these things can get done.
Okay, that makes sense.
Luis.
Yeah, I'm curious about the slide before, you don't have to go back, but it talked about sort of major versus minor, and major might, involve legal, counsel and so forth. And I'm not dismissing the importance of speaking out of turn and stating, sharing information that shouldn't be stated, but I'm kind of wondering, is that really what most of it's about, or are there really, I mean, I can start to imagine some pretty serious conflicts of interest and, for personal gain that was sort of hinted at earlier and, other things I can think of as major. So what is major, I guess?
Well, let me
And what do
think
you
about
normally see? Is it,
I think a major that comes to mind is a board member who did not vote for/want the current superintendent. This is not by any stretch a naive board member, had been there for a long time. I happened to be board president at the time, she had been there longer than I was on the board. Not smart, not dumb by any stretch, very smart. And she is as deviant as she is smart. And so, knowing all of the rules, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's been covered yet, that basically the only people that report to the board is the treasurer and the superintendent. She did not want to legitimately do the right thing, so she went to the treasurer to have the treasurer do things that the superintendent should be doing, moved it to written documents and had it presented by her in a board meeting. And in her mind, I'm following protocol, the treasurer works for us. We had to stop the meeting, go into executive session, have the attorneys then intervene, because that was not even anything we should be even considering in a meeting, let alone a public meeting, let alone the surprise, the drama of it. And she quickly relented in the meeting, she wanted the drama.
David?
So, yeah, I think this gets to one of the questions I had earlier. The last part is, on the previous slide, it says that talking about, board member performance or removal from office or something like that cannot be done in executive session. And that's, seems to be the one exception to the sunshine law around personnel matters, right?
Yeah.
So-
We're not employees of the district, we're
Right.
with that community.
Okay.
That
This-
community,
yeah.
So in the instance you're talking about, where somebody was doing something that was completely out of hand, and you're talking about, seriously cut the crap, don't do this. Why wasn't that done in the public meeting instead of going into executive session?
Because it was a legal matter. And what we were doing in that room was getting an attorney
Okay.
to give us the legal advice about the content of what she had created, not.
Not about her performance.
Right.
So it was
Right.
the product, not how it
She was trying to change the duties of the treasurer and the superintendent.
Okay,
If you were to change the duties of your two highest ranking officials, that's a legal matter.
Right, and
That's a
to
contract
take
issue.
away the superintendent's ability to do the job because she has decided it should be done by the treasurer, who was put in a position of, this is my boss, like, what am I supposed to do? It was a really ugly situation. Now, did we not take some time to I'm being facetious here, call her names and all of that while we're giving the legal advice? Absolutely. But we were in executive session because of the legality of that situation. Because I had to go back out and explain to the public why that was not gonna be considered. And I had to do it in the context of rules of, Robert's rules. Everything legal had to be a part of that presentation to squelch that thing.
Plus you on the city council oftentimes does pretty exciting meetings. And in general, it's probably best for the school board not to have people arguing in public. They're televised, and it's just lacking in decorum, and it doesn't give the Empire writes it up, because they love that kind of
Love it.
drama and intrigue, and that really just makes everything look bad.
Well, and it's unusual for the decisions not to be 7-0, at least in all of my observations of board meetings.
It depends on the board. I think this is one of the things Rick and I talked about. So Rick's board was very different than my board, and I think very different than the current board. And I think one of the reasons we were really happy Rick was here was because, again, you don't get to pick the people who sit around the board table with you, right? So you may be very reasonable and very honest and doing this work for all of the right reasons. That doesn't mean everybody else will be. I think in my case, we worked really hard, and we, in our first retreat, set some norms around that we wanted to do some big things and make some pretty big changes, and we couldn't do those if we weren't 7-0, right? Like, we couldn't vote on something like changing the magnet enrollment policy if there were gonna be some people tons of times we were compromising, right? We were like, you're going on something and nobody was happy, but everybody was okay with moving it forward. There are other boards that getting to 4 was,
It's mandatory.
was enough, was
And
hard.
At that time, I will say that the superintendent's last name was Adamowski. And his name in the newspaper was 4-3 Adamowski. Because he could, the only way he got anything done was because there were 4 votes to make it happen. And there were 3 who woke up every day trying to figure out how to stop it.
So that's where we wanted like very different perspectives. So I think, David, you're right, we've worked pretty hard on getting, but community doesn't always see everything about someone in an election until they're sitting in those seats and seeing how difficult it is to get things to move forward. So speaking of community, we wanted to talk about community engagement versus constituent response. And so we're gonna play a little game about that in a second, but we're using these same concepts though of like what falls into governance and what falls into management. That's also important to think about when it's about a community engagement versus responding to constituent concerns. And I think, you know, there's just tons of overlap there. This is not a really clear-cut one. But when it comes to community engagement, there's often a lot of overlap. When it comes to constituent response, that is clearly the administration. So we're gonna do a game in a second, but we thought it'd be helpful if maybe Mary, who has sat in that role for a long time, could give us just like a real quick example of something that would have been community engagement that would have taken board and admin together versus something that is clearly constituent response, and that was her team's role.
Oh, okay, I would say, for instance, the facilities master plan and supplier diversity, that required your constituent engagement. The other would be calls about, you know, a parent doesn't like a principal, so they call the board office. You know, and that kind of communication, getting back with a parent, they don't like the uniform policy or something like that. Those kinds of things, most of the calls do go to the board office, and their administrative assistant sends it over to my office. For me to follow up, sometimes I'll copy the board on a letter, you know, especially if it's a hot issue, so the board knows I got back and this is what I've said. That way then we're all consistent in what we're saying. So there were calls, I mean, not a day goes by where there's not phone calls to the board office that I get back with. But the really, should I say, the hot ones or more controversial ones, I copy the board on the response.
What if the question, the constituent goes directly to a board member, not to the board
We do it all the time.
So what is the board member's responsibility in that role?
Yes.
You know, oftentimes, you know, a board member would call me to follow up, and that's fine. Or they'd tell Phyllis, the admin, and then copy all the board members about it. Or just say, by the way, Mary, I was in Kroger's and this parent's upset about this
So
at
what
this
they
school.
should do is let you know.
Yes, and then of course I would talk to the assistant superintendent or call that principal and say, you know, what's going on here that somebody's so upset. But the trouble is, sometimes it does take a while to get back because you've got 60 schools and there's just drama everywhere and personnel issues and just issues everywhere. And you know, invariably the ones that you feel are probably the most important that you're trying to get back with right away, those ones go smoothly. And some little trivial one blows up and you see it on the news and you go, oh my gosh, that was one I never imagined. I kind of had given it lesser priority and suddenly that one was the issue. So there's just every day there's calls like that.
And I think the tricky part, we're gonna do a game right now on this, so hopefully we'll get into this. The tricky part though, to Heather, your question is, the majority of the things that come to you as a board member, especially just like wandering life, is actually constituent response. Community engagement are those bigger picture questions, like facilities master plan, diversity, hiring, right? Like facility master plan, engagement, stuff about Vision 2020, like all of that, that's community engagement. So let's use these same cards again. This time, you have another option. You could hold up both board and admin together. Because a lot of the times, it's both the board and admin who are gonna be doing community engagement. So, either, I'm gonna put a question up here, hold up a card if you think it's the admin's job, the board's job, board and admin, but you just don't know. All right, so let's try the first one here. First question. Okay, and I should say, none of these were made up scenarios. These are all things that have happened in my life. So, first scenario. Someone stops you at your kid's swim team practice to tell you that the lawn outside the high school in their neighborhood is rarely mowed in the summer and is a mess. What are you holding up? Which side? Oh, see, y'all are good. That one is the administration.
So you just call Mary.
Okay.
Yeah, I call the director of facilities and I
Yes,
say, hey, over
exactly.
there.
Yep, so what do you do?
What
And
happens?
exactly, you don't tell that person, I'm on it, I'm gonna get your lawn mowed for you. That is not the right response. The right response is to say, thank you, I will let our superintendent know. You let Mary know, and like Mary said, she'll go to the director of facilities. Okay. So email the superintendent, and then just ask her to let you know that it's been resolved. Although you're probably gonna drive by the high school and see it yourself too. So this gets to our bylaws about communication, right? This is one of our other objectives tonight, is for you all to understand how the board and administration talk. It's one of the things that makes it really hard to get your work done, right? It would be awesome if everyone could just, call everybody all of the time, but it would also be a nightmare for our administration. So, there are bylaws, and the first line here is really everything you need to know. That the line of communication between the board and the staff is through the superintendent or treasurer. Those are the only people that the board should be going directly to. Okay, the exception, the one kind of big exception here is, and you'll see in a minute, we're gonna do the board structure. There are committees, and the superintendent assigns liaisons from her office to the committees. If you're working directly on a project with that committee liaison, you can go directly to that person, but that's your only exception. And that's because, like Mary said, she can't have 7 bosses going to 7 different people in her office all the time, assigning them stuff and asking them to do things, right? It is not our job as board members to make assignments to the staff. So, let's go on to our next one here. A parent you know from your child's preschool emails you to say that their child, who goes to a Catholic school, is assigned to a bus that's late almost every day. She's called the bus company, they said to get in touch with CPS, so she emailed and called the director of transportation numerous times. It's not getting better. Is that your job as a board member, or is that the admin's job?
So let me just be clear. So parent has called the director of transportation, and they're telling the board member this story.
Exactly.
Okay.
Parent just came up to me and told me this
Call the
story.
bus company.
They've called the bus company, they've called the, yep.
Yes.
And they've called it, this parent has also called the director of transportation, they're not getting anywhere, their bus is still late all the
Okay,
time.
so I've done this multiple times, so let's see.
So whose job is this? So this parent's now telling you as a board member, is this your job or the administration's job? Go ahead and hold up your card. Alright?
That Catholic school.
We're gonna get to that question in just a second.
Yeah.
Alright, so you guys are right, that is administration.
Yeah.
Do you go, what do you do with that information? You go call the director of transportation and tell them to get that bus there? No, what do you do? What do you do?
Okay.
There you go, all of a sudden. That's right, I love all the
And I can promise you, you will get this because there's, transportation is a nightmare. Let me put this in perspective. CPS contract, Metro is one of our vendors. We have 1,300 routes per day, 350 buses, they're not ours. So we contract with First Student, Peterman, Laylaw for the yellow buses. The high school kids have Metro. So this thing is huge. Then to make it worse, not only do we have to transport our students, we're required by law to transport all the parochial students, all the charter school students. Now, it's probably $43 million of your budget in transportation costs, a huge number. So you're trying every single way to figure out how to cut costs. So for instance, we do double routing of our buses, a 7:45 and a 9:15 school, because you save 30% if you can use the same bus and the same driver. So we've got our schools locked in early or late. Parochial and charter can say, not interested in that, I want an 8 o'clock start time, which is everyone's favorite start time. So it's huge. So now it's a singleton route that costs a fortune. The other problem is, just so you know, this, when you're on the board, you're gonna hear this all the time. Bus driver shortage. 10 people start the course. pay for you to take the training. First of all, you've gotta get past all the drug and conviction issues, and even having written a bad check will bump you out of being a bus driver. I had no idea what that is to do with being a bus driver. Then so you finally get 10 people who pass all the background mess. Only 3 of the 10 can actually pass to get that, what is it, DCL or CLD, whatever it is. Because, I mean, I couldn't drive that bus and make all those turns. So that's your problem. Then, when First Student and Layla hire the bus drivers, they are part-time, they work, in the morning and then they work in the afternoon, they're kinda off during the day, and they're paying them maybe $14 an hour, maybe 15 by now. Meanwhile, you've got Metro and sorta full-time work. So First Student and our yellow bus companies train them, then Metro steals them away. So you'll get calls from city council. I got a call from the vice mayor, Mary White, says my child's bus late every day. Well, it is a parochial school, demanded an 8 o'clock start time. So then the bus drivers are unionized, so they get to pick their route. So am I gonna pick the Singleton route, so I only work for 2 hours, or am I gonna pick the double route where I get 4 hours worth of pay? So the bus drivers, thank God, at least pick our double route because they make more money, which of course, then that's what causes the private and parochial. So I mean, we keep saying to them, you're demanding an 8 o'clock start time. You realize we don't have enough bus drivers and they aren't gonna be picking your route. So, over the years, a lot of the charter schools they at least try to accommodate, but they don't have to. So that's why there's a transportation mess. We may have the buses, we don't have the drivers, and when you got everyone in his brother, then we downsized in our district to about 57, 58 schools. Now there's 40 charter schools, you're back up to 90 schools again. So that's why it's so ineffective, incredibly expensive, there'll never be enough bus drivers, and you'll hear complaints when you're on the board, because no matter what you do, it's an ongoing problem. So that's the transportation story.
That's just transportation.
And that's what I meant when I said in the beginning, when we talk about, we know there are issues, like hearing the experience that Barry just went through, of like, that's what it takes just to get our kids. And there are state laws in place to answer Melissa's original question of, was a Catholic school kid? There are state laws in place that say our district has to transport every child, even though we don't get the money for it, nor can we make them get on our schedules.
$43 million out of the budget on just buses.
So then does that become something that needs to be, like, for whoever's running for state legislature, they need to start saying, look, if we're responsible for this, we're gonna get a cut of that, so the money that the parochial schools are getting, so that we can, or we're gonna have to stop the service.
Yeah.
So, okay, so, got it.
There are plenty of other states that have laws in place that say you have to transport everyone, but you have to go on the district schedule.
Yeah.
Ohio has none of
They
that.
can decide Saturday, they don't have to start and stop when we do. They can be going during our spring breaks. You see, it's so much more expensive. They can start at different times, different months of the year. It is incredibly expensive, and we can't rein it in.
Let's try one more here. Okay, so now that was one parent at one school, right? Now let's say though, you have heard from a significant number of parents at your child's school that the bus is consistently late, causing all of these kids to get to school late and miss learning time. Is that admin, board, both, or you just don't know? It's okay to say I don't know, that's all right. It's always a good okay answer.
I wanna put him in the schedule.
There you go, board. I like that answer. Good. Okay, so that one is both. And here's why. All right, so what do we actually do with that information? Again, this happens so often, because transportation is one of the big ones, right? So this again happens to me, where I got a bunch of parents at my school saying this happens all the time. So we know it's a response from both. Anyone know what I would actually do with that information? Sam, what do you think I should do with that?
As a board member,
As a board member, what do I do with that?
talk to Mary.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's basically it, but this is one that we would do in public. So, because it's not just an individual, we know it's like a school-wide problem. So at a board meeting, I would make an assignment. This is how work gets done, right? You make an assignment. So I'd make an assignment to the superintendent at a public meeting where I'd ask if her team can report back to the board about if this is just a one school issue or is this affecting lots of schools in the district. And the reason it's both, it could be about both of us is because it might take a board action, like approving a whole other bus contract, which is something the board does, or it may end up just being an administrative response. The administration might come back and be like, it's actually just happening at this school, and so we're gonna have our routers reroute that school, and that's an administrative response.
and it helps, and it's, thoughtful board members let me know in advance too, they're gonna make an assignment, because that way you could have talked to your director of transportation. So sometimes they can stand up at a board meeting because they've had a little bit of time to think about it and investigate it, so sometimes can answer on the spot. Other times I just have to say, we'll get back with you, because I do have to investigate and figure out what in the world is going on. So, you know, you hate surprises, so it's always nice.
Perfect example is what just happened at the last board meeting, when the director of transportation did stand up and talk. Some of you were there, some of you guys were. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully he had advanced.
You could tell he
notes.
was ready.
You can tell he got,
Yeah.
You see, and that's really, well, then it's resolved, as opposed to him saying, I'm gonna investigate it. Then, you know, you're back 2 weeks or 4 weeks later, and now it's moved on to some other issue, and then he's giving a report, so it's best if you let the superintendent know.
Marlena,
Not to backtrack,
Yeah.
but doing it anyway. So going back to the busing of non-public schools, so as a district, we are not actually required to transport high school age students. We do though, and there's equity issues. I mean, I'm glad we do it because I send my daughter on the metro every day. But like Xavier, Eldor, they also use the metro. What if we stopped offering the transportation to the high schools?
We have to offer comparable services.
Okay, but if we
So-
offer nothing, what's the comparable service
Yeah,
to
we
offer
could,
them?
yeah, we could cut it out for our students too, that's what I'm saying. So do you wanna cut out high school transportation for all CPS students in order to punish
That's,
the?
yeah, that's the point I'm trying to get at, is if we said, we're not gonna do high school transportation
You can
anymore,
do that.
would that mean then that the non-public
Yes.
schools don't have transportation?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you could do that.
Okay.
Our kids couldn't get.
Bunch of poor kids who can't get to school, so I think you would shoot yourself in the foot. Plus, you have to remember, folks in Catholic schools have to vote for levies. So how many votes do you wanna leave to fire up a huge constituency of people who are now gonna vote down your next levy? So you can do that, so it's dicey.
well, you're gonna do transportation, so you don't need all this money.
Yeah, we say, yeah. And it comes down to, again, we talk a lot at the board about, if we want equity in, outcomes, that we have to have equity in access and opportunity, right? So we can't just offer, great high schools that offer lots of different programming. We actually have to also have access to those, and we have to have equitable access to them. So we can't just say, we've got Walnut Hills, the #1 high school in, this public high school in the state of Ohio, we've got SCPA, we've got, Aiken who's gonna do new tech stuff and, access to technology. We can't just say we have those and that's equitable. We have to say you actually have equitable access. And so when I was on the board, we still had a 50-cent drop, like so kids had to pay 50 cents, so it was a reduced fare. But one of the things that the administration came to us with was saying, we actually know that $1 a day is $5 a week. And then you have, that's $20 a month. That's actually a significant amount of money for so many of our families. And then if you have multiple high schoolers, that's a lot. So we've got a lot of kids who end up not coming to school just because they can't afford it.
It'll change,
Yeah.
it's hard.
And so they suggested in the budget that they proposed that if we wanted this equitable access, that we pay the full fare. So it was millions of dollars, which means you have to find money from something else to put to that. But it was again one of those equity issues. Yes, and then let's move on to.
So my question is more about the role of a board member. So you said that they're not like city council in that, like, people will say, my pipe should go to a board member if I have an issue, and then then as a board member, you bring it to the full board, or you decide like if you should call the superintendent, or should, like, how does that work? Cause I think I'm thinking about it on like local government, and you're saying it's different, so I wanna know the protocol for that.
That's an excellent question. Go for it, you want to take it on?
You're asking a question about the behavior of a constituent, of a resident, of a citizen, which is different from the behavior of a board member. So you should feel free, from my perspective, because this is not in the protocol, you call anybody you want.
Yeah.
Because we are all here to serve you. What we do with it needs to be appropriate to all.
Well, that's what I'm saying, so if I have like a friend who is a CPS parent, and I'm on the board, and they come to me about something, or anybody, random in Kroger, do I just say, okay, that's something that I'll talk to Mary about, or like, do I come to the board and say this is, you know, a couple people's thing, like, what is that role, like, when constituents come to me as a board member, how does that work? It's different from city council, yes.
Yeah, you will, if this is, like some of these exercises, some of them, it'll be clear to you that this is an administrative
Okay,
issue.
okay.
And you can feel free to do that, but there are also times when it is clearly an administrative issue, where you believe the board should know
Okay, okay.
that it's been asked, and you typically will need the board to know, just in case it turns into one of those things like Mary mentioned earlier, it seems simple, and then all of a sudden it's in the newspaper.
I'm gonna tell you a funny story too, though, that is like, well, once it happened, so, it's cause sports games, I swear, I mean, Mary's kids went to CPS while she was superintendent, and we used to talk about this all the time, all of us who were either in her cabinet or on the board who have kids in CPS, you go to a sports game for your own kid, you're gonna be surrounded by parents asking questions, it happens all the time, right? So at one point, I was at my son's basketball game, and he was playing against the team that the general counsel's son was on. So I was chatting, like, so Dan was sitting just a couple rows in front of me, and we were chatting away, and like always happens, a parent asked me a question, was like, hey, I do work around gender equity in my work, and I've been trying to figure out who the lawyer is for CPS. Could you hook me up sometime? And I was like, well, by sometime, I could do it right now. And so literally it was like, Dan, I would like you to be Kate, right? And so in that sense, that was just pretty fortuitous that everyone was right there. But that would have been a case where I would have gone back and said, yes, of course I can, and set them up later. But things, I mean, all the time, people are coming up to you all the time. And so my response to people most of the time was I wanted them to get their question answered fastest, right? So sometimes I'd say, you are welcome to write a letter to the board about that. However, if you really want it solved, please write your letter to the superintendent and copy the board, because we're just gonna pass it to the superintendent anyway. So that was usually my response. One more, and then let's go on so we can.
So did you call Mary before you went?
Yeah, tell me where I should stand. Right, yeah. Now I should say too, for like efficiency's sake, there are things like I was saying to Mary when we were actually coming up with some of these examples, like, you don't want to be inefficient though, right? So like there was a time where I was literally at a board meeting, I got a text from somebody that was like, look at this raggedy American flag in front of my kid's building, school building, can't CPS get a better flag? I was literally sitting across from the director of transportation. That would have been this isn't a huge assignment I'm making, right? Like this is me being like, Bill, can we get a new flag? And he was like right there, he was like, to his person, put a new flag, right? And it was done. So that, we're not trying to be inefficient. But had I gotten that and not been at the board office, I would not have gone to Bill. Like I would have emailed Mary, and she would have just forwarded it on. Okay, let's try another one here. A group of parents, it's asking you to move high school start times later. You need to determine if that's the right course of action. Is that the board, administration, or both?
Yeah.
We wanted to add on
I know, right? I see there's also a vote there. So you guys are right, it's both. So why is it both? Is because we know that this is about engagement, right? This is not constituent response. You're gonna have to engage the full community around this. I like that Marlena gave her vote on it too, over there, thumbs up. But as a high school parent. So board policy or governance action, and it's definitely gonna involve the administration to implement it. So I think that the like main theme we're trying to get you all to see here, right, is that, that there's almost no time when the board should be doing community engagement without the administration, right? It is not our day job to be running the district. It is their day job to run the district. So we're representatives of the community, so we should be engaging them, but the right people from the administration need to be at the table. So that means when we're doing something like this question about high school start times, if just the board was doing this work, we would have no idea anything about the like intricate questions around how we're gonna work out transportation. We wouldn't know so many things about how schedules are set up in the high schools. So we need the assistant superintendent for high schools at the table, right? Like there's a community engagement director in the district that needs to be doing this work. And so it's always important. There are certainly things that are board driven, right? So like when we did the superintendent search, that was board driven. That was our job. It's like our number one job. Poor Rick did 3 superintendent searches in his time on board. Oh, 2, just 2, sorry, I added another 2. But like that is clearly our job to engage the community. But we had the community engagement director, who was the one who was actually reaching out to community and bringing in people in. We had our HR team helping us write job descriptions, right? Like we had our legal team making sure that we were doing everything according to sunshine law. So everything we're doing is both the board and the administration. Let's go ahead and move on to our sunshine laws. These are the reasons here why you're allowed to go into executive session, right? So our sunshine laws are the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. Rick was gonna hit on just a couple of points about the sunshine laws, and then we were gonna have Mary Rick give a couple of examples. We're really just talking about how this makes it really hard for the board to do their work, to be honest. And so, yeah, so Rick, did you wanna talk a little bit about,
I'm considering all of you all responsible board members. And this is this set of laws around sunshine law, these are the ones that make the most responsible board members want to not follow the rules. Because it just creates barriers to effective communication, accesses, efficiency. They just challenge all of what's natural to get something done quickly. So this is also therefore the one where the people are breaching it, you kind of are okay. But you can't be. So bottom line, it's cumbersome, but you do figure out ways to be within the law to get things done, and that's what it requires. I think that's how Committee of the Whole was born. That's why the numbers on committees are under a majority of the board, because it's not considered a meeting and therefore it can be had. All of those things are the structural ways these rules are followed.
And I think one key thing is that just because you don't want to talk about something in public, doesn't mean you can try to squeeze it into one of these rules. That is the quickest way to run afoul of the law, right? Like there are some things you do not want to have to talk about in public, but you actually do have to. And committees are subject to sunshine law and subcommittees. So that means everyone who's on an LSDMC here, you are actually subject to all of the same sunshine laws. And that also means emailing and texting are subject to sunshine laws. And it's important to know all of these, not just to stay legal, but also because when you follow this, you build transparency and trust with the public. Like that's the bottom line about why we do this. But it can be hard and it's easy to slip into on this stage. I don't know if anyone, it was a couple months ago, there were some headlines about texting with a public body. Everyone remember this?
That's how it begins.
Yeah.
So 5 of them, you had quorum.
Right.
Next.
Yeah, so city council, and I mean, I felt badly for the city council people whose texts were now on the front page of the Inquirer, right? And our general counsel, one of the first things he told us, to Jasmine's question about training, one of the first things he told us in training was, if you don't want it on the front page of the Inquirer, don't put it in email or a text. It is all subject to the sunshine laws. And I will also say, I don't think it happens less frequently in the board than on city council. I just think that, quite frankly, we no longer have a reporter dedicated to CPS. So we don't get it requested as often.
This
But-
is what they do,
yes.
is they will come and request from the general counsel every email, let's say concerning bus issues, from the superintendent, the director of transportation, all 7 board members in public affairs for the last year. Now, yes, so they get this incredible pile of emails, everything that's said, and it's horrific because you can get sucked in, then they find out unrelated topics that happen to be on a chain email, and then, you get mad at, David, and you send him a very snippy email, oh God, that's so juicy. And I've read horrible emails over the years going, oh dear God, this is so horrible, this gets out there. It's like Big Brother, it's horrible, all these people saying stuff, and that's what they do, they go fishing for one thing, and then they find all this other juicy stuff that you all have been getting along and arguing, and then they put it in the paper, so that's why it's just so treacherous, and even phone messages on district phones. So I was to the point, I'd call you up and just say, just call me, because I didn't wanna leave some big old message about a hot situation, because even that could be taken, it's just creepy.
Mary, can you tell us one example of when, I mean, I know there's some things in executive session you can't tell us about, but a time when, just so that they know that this happens, right? The district has been sued for violation of sunshine laws.
Yeah,
Can you give us one of those
It was
examples?
a committee of the whole on a Wednesday afternoon, and the, city council had decided not to give us our $5 million that they have an agreement to give us, because they're able to abate everything like here and over the Rhine. And we don't get the tax revenue from that, so in lieu of the taxes the district should have gotten, they give us $5 million a year. And it was a new city manager, didn't understand this, or some city council person, so they really had told us, we're not giving you your $5 million. So this is gonna go into litigation, because we're gonna have to sue. So anyway, that's what it was about, so you really don't wanna publicly talk about suing the city of Cincinnati, because that's gonna be all over the news. So a motion was made to go into executive session, and one of the board members said, I don't think since we haven't been sued yet, we should go into executive session, and then 2 female board members got into a big argument, it was ugly. So in the end, we went into executive session. So then the one board member, and this is board members behaving badly, was angry that she lost. So she got on the phone and called up the newspaper reporter and said, I think the Board of Education had an illegal meeting. So, Jack Reiner, you see he's at the Inquirer every Sunday and has he's the lawyer for the Inquirer. So he files suit. So now, you would never really get your pound of flesh, just so you all know that. A year later, this is how long the wheels of justice run. A year later, we all get subpoenas. So I'm down there with a bunch of board members over at the Taft office over there by the Westin, and the lawyer walked us across the street to Frost, Brown and Todd, where Jack Reiner was, so we could all get deposed about what happened that day. It was insane. Plus, he asked me, who made the motion to go into executive session and who seconded it? Now, there's 100 board meetings a year. If you offered me $1 million, would I be able to tell you what board member? It was just crazy, but in the end, it cost a ton of money. We're all sitting down there. We lost the case because they said it wasn't pending litigation. But that's the kind of thing that went on, and we all, like I said, subpoenas, and we all had to give depositions sitting in the lawyer's office a year later for violating
changing a few details. But if the board makes an assignment to the administration in a committee, and then the policy comes back and they work on the policy and everything gets signed off on, and then there's work that goes on around that. And they make an assignment to the administration to do this other thing. Is it above board to say, do this as an administration meeting and then let me know when it is so I can show up so I don't need to notice the meeting?
So, board members should never be in administrative meetings. And so, Rick, you have an example though of a board member who did that all the time, right? Like you were telling me about that, like
Yeah,
and that
but I think we're thinking of the same person, Mary brought her up earlier, she,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's board members who do that
would like to,
kind of.
yeah. The temptation, I just need to keep pointing out, there are temptations to go beyond this. The community wants you to. And so if you have a constituency that can be defined, like I remember when you introduced yourself and there was, I don't remember exactly, but there was something you were associated with. How did you introduce yourself?
Montessori, is that my
Montessori.
position? I worked for American Montessori
Right,
Society.
so let's say when you get on the board, and it's easy for you to see the Montessori community is your constituency. And it's easy for them to say, we've got someone on the board. And then they are regularly coming to you for you to be their board member. And you feel legitimately, based on your knowledge, your relationships, and your newfound power as a board member. And it's absolutely relevant that Montessori issues are a discussion item. Suddenly, the board is doing more Montessori conversations than they would if you were not there.
Yep.
And suddenly, there are more Montessori parents coming to you and expecting you to do something that really is about administration. It's just easy for it to happen. You get these pressures to do so. So it will be very easy for you to find yourself in a room, in a meeting, because the parents told you about it, because the administration is meeting with the Montessori community over whatever, and they want you there. And it's very easy for you to find yourself sitting there and having forgotten all of this.
I think the important thing, that's a perfect example, is like, it's hard because as a board member, like, you don't actually do any work, right? Like, you, like, set the policy.
You're working hard.
You're working hard, but if you don't do any work. Yeah, Mary's team does the work though, right? So like, in that example you
But
just
under your
gave.
direction.
That
Yeah.
was a bad, that was a
A bad way to put
bad
it. You really work hard, believe me.
You
But,
liar.
You're right, but you don't implement anything. So after the board passed that policy, the hard part, like Rick is saying, the hard part is you don't get to do it. You don't get to do any of the work. You don't get to do, like, that is like, after we spent literally 2 years revamping every one of our enrollment policies, when I would hear from parents that like X thing wasn't happening, do you know how tempting it was to want to just do the work, right? To just want to walk down to that office and be like, can't you just do X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah? That is not my job. So in that example, after that policy is passed, you can make an assignment to the administration to go work on it, but the board is no longer sitting there. They did their job, they passed the policy, and now the administration decides the procedure and the implementation.
We're working around the sunshine laws by making the administration have the meeting so you don't have to notice it. That's like totally not on board.
Yeah, and we're gonna, and with the.
That's correct, and I know exactly what you're referring to, the meetings you're referring to.
Yeah.
It's
If
not.
it's governance work, then you should not be turning it over.
Yeah. We're gonna do a quick game again to, I think will help distinguish these things, and then we're gonna quickly grab dinner, come in and sit down and do the second part of this about board structure and admin structure, okay? So, and I think I was a little too ambitious about how much we were gonna cover in one night, but let's go ahead. This time you're using your thumbs up, thumbs down. So,
Yeah.
yeah, or in your donut. Yeah, so always feel free to use your two little shrug buttons. Okay, gotta tell me if this is okay or not. The board secretary texts all 7 board members to remind them there's an emergency meeting scheduled tomorrow at noon. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. That's totally okay. Yes, why is it okay? There's no discussion or deliberation. So to meet the definition of a meeting, it has to have a quorum of board members at a prearranged time, and there's discussion or deliberation, right, of board matters. So that's totally fine. So now, continuing that exact example, if I could, a board member texts back that she doesn't think we should hold an emergency meeting, then other board members chime in about why they think we should.
Oh, yeah.
Right, very good, you all got this. No, why not? Because now you're discussing board business, right?
See how easy it is, how it happens.
So spam text is the next thing.
Right, well, and this happened often, right? And one of us would usually jump in, well, not usually, we'd always jump in and say, we're now having a discussion, cut it off. And people would then cut it off, right? Because again, it wasn't like Rick's point before, it wasn't usually intentional that somebody was, it's just so easy to do. All right, so now,
So,
Yes.
I mean, just to work the edge case on that one.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, I can't make it, and there's no discussion, that's cool.
yeah.
Okay.
And that's not deliberating about board business. That's not even a discussion. That's just saying I can't make it. That's fine. Yeah, discussion, you can discuss, you're just not discussing board business. Yeah.
But if it's 2 board members who are friends, and they are discussing, they have their own text, and they're like, we don't need to have this meeting, blah, 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 that's fine.
Totally fine. It's not a quorum. Yep. Yep. So we're gonna get to example just like that. So let's say, to Jasmine's question, she just asked. That is exactly this next scenario. So 3 board members are on the phone talking about one of the topics on the next meeting's agenda. Is that okay to do?
Are they a committee?
3, no, just 3 board members. Can you do that? That is a good question.
Yeah, because if it was a committee, you couldn't do that, right?
Right, but this is just a topic on the next board meeting. What do you think? Can you do it or not?
Wait, if
3
they
board-
were 3 board members, I'm trying to understand what David just
Okay,
said.
so
If they were the
maybe
3
If
board
you were the
members.
3 board members on policy committee, you could not do that, because you are the committee.
Right.
But you're just 3 random board members on the board talking about a board business. Can you do that? Yes. Right, you can do that. Why? Not a quorum. You guys read this in your pre-work though. You can't hang up and then Robin style call everybody else to get their opinion. That, the law says, is now a meeting. So if the 7 of you are the board and Tim calls Kareem and asks, hey, what do you think about this thing we're voting on tomorrow night? Get her opinion. Then he calls Heather. Then he calls A. You cannot do that because that is now a quorum. He's talked to everybody and you're talking about board business.
No, if you, like, leave an hour
No,
between.
you cannot. You cannot do it. All right.
3-way.
Okay, another one.
I'm gonna call you, then you can.
Right,
Tell
right.
us and let us know.
See, this is how it happens.
I'm sorry.
You know what they had to say. Now it's like when I was in middle school and you're trying to like trap your best friend and just say something. Okay. All right, how about our next example? One of the board members is having a graduation party for her son, invites the other 6 board members, they all come and have a good time. Is that okay? Yeah.
But
So.
you can't discuss board business.
That's right, because even though it's a quorum and it's a prearranged time, they didn't discuss board business.
So that's not an excuse to not invite the board membership.
Exactly. And as Rick said, when you're trying to build, a nice atmosphere on the board, you do get to know each other well. Invite everybody. Okay. Let's see, I think there's one more. Or don't invite anybody for that matter. Although I will say, if anyone knows how bad you need a drink after a board meeting, it's your fellow board members. Okay, so the board is notified by the superintendent that a staff member in the district has been arrested. They call an executive session, they send the notification to the public. Is this okay?
In that order?
Yeah, no, yes, that's a good question. No, they've sent a notification, they're calling their executive session. So they're following the rules, is this okay to do? Yep. this is exactly true too. So yes, this is okay to do. What you have to do is actually call an emergency meeting, and in that
Right.
emergency meeting, it's an executive session. I love it, John. So yes, that is okay.
I don't wanna be on either.
So anyone have any idea what the reason would be for calling executive session?
Discussing a personnel issue.
Exactly. So it's, for personnel.
Really wish it was
There you go. So it's for employment of a public official, right? So that's what you're calling it for. So you go into executive session, and now, during that executive session, a board member asks for an update on a lawsuit against the district that was previously discussed. Is that okay?
No, because it wasn't it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't pre-announced.
Very good. So, congratulations.
Just being transparent.
So no, I can't put this clicker to work. Why not? Because pending litigation, that's an actual reason you're allowed to call executive session, but you did not notice it for that.
Right.
And so as Barry will tell you, what did people start to do at the board?
Well, I'd say I need employment of a public official, I need to talk about pending litigation. You know, I mean, so it was hard, we had to go back out of executive session, vote to go out, and go back in, you know, all that, so it's better, you know, if I thought it was going to come up, I picked 2 or 3 of things, not just one, because, you know, when you knew somebody was gonna ask, it's better than safe than.
Yeah, sorry. Yep. So, at this point, we have, yes, we learned that you should just call it for everything. Marisa, can you just stand up for me, thank you. So, we've gotten through, keep clicking. There we go. So, we've gotten through these, first bunch of objectives here. And what we still need to hit on is the board structure, so how do we actually get the work done on the board? And the admin structure, how are they set up to get work done? We have a little less than 30 minutes to cover a whole lot of stuff. So why don't we go grab dinner quickly, bring it back in here, and we'll talk over dinner.
Comes on the back.